Welcome to Pastor Talk. This is Pastor Tim here with Pastor Jamie, who also happens to be my wife. Hi, Jamie. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you.
We're talking to you about marriage. Now, we are not experts in marriage by any stretch of the imagination. However, we've been married for a good number of years.
17 years.
Exactly. That's why you're here. Exactly. So we wanted to share some of our thoughts and also our imperfect thoughts, because we're still going through this process of learning how to be a better husband and wife, and also to have a marriage that honors God. And so we wanted to talk to you today just about some things that we do, some practices we put into place, and how to have a marriage that honors God. And we're also, if you have comments, please feel free to go to our YouTube and input those comments. I know you can't on an audio podcast, but on our YouTube, you can input comments. Would love to hear from you. Things that work, things that don't work, any learnings that you have from marriage yourself. And I think to start off, we've talked about this before, but I have some notes pulled up from the book You and Me Forever from Francis Chan and his wife Lisa Chan. And Jamie and I have done a marriage group before on this book. And I like this book because it talks about having an eternally focused marriage, a marriage focused on the kingdom of God and not just on the two people or on just your little niche of a family, but that there's a bigger perspective to have when you serve God on what the vision is, on how your marriage can honor God and how you can have an eternity perspective in your marriage. So what are some thoughts based on having gone through this, Jamie, that you have on that and kind of what that actually means to have an eternity perspective when it comes to marriage?
I think, definitely helps me just look at the bigger picture. If we just live our life just like that day to day where we're just trying to get to the next thing, or like what's for dinner, or, just got to make it through the end of the week, we lose the bigger picture of what God has intended for marriage. And so when I think about like a heavenly perspective, and it just gives me an opportunity to look at our marriage in a different way, and how do we raise our kids, and puts like a little pause to, as I'm thinking about what I'm going to do this week or all my plans, because I am a huge planner. And so what is important? What's the long-term goal? If I have just a short-term goal, once that's made, I just go on to the next thing. But looking at things from more of a long-term perspective helps me kind of put those short-term goals into more important succession, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and a quote from the book says, we all have callings from God, and those callings are bigger than our marriages. And I think for me, before I got married, marriage was always like the end goal. Like it's what is, like it feels like when you're single or starting out, learning how to be an adult, like marriage is like the end goal. But really, it's just the start of a new journey with someone else. And together, hopefully you have 10, 20, 30, 50 years together. That is a long time with one person where you have a lot of work to do for the kingdom. And God has there's giftings He's given each one of you, and those giftings are often different. And so how do you work together instead of just pursuing your own agenda, your own vision? How do you work together to ensure that you're building God's kingdom and creating a legacy that others will see, because your kids will see it, friends, all kinds of people are looking at your marriage and saying, do you have a healthy fear of God? Do you have joy even in the midst of trial and pain? Another quote from the book says, we can't afford to waste our marriage by merely pursuing our own happiness, right? You see in culture today where happiness is like the end goal. As long as I'm happy, everything else will just fall into play. And so that becomes our goal where, well, what if I'm not happy anymore in a marriage or with someone, where the honeymoon phase is over? And so I'm going to try to get that high from someone else or something else. And it just becomes where we're chasing our own desires instead of the desires of God, and then trying to satisfy the desires of the other person? Like, what do they want out of life? How can I help them, support them with the giftings God has given our partner in this life? And so it's really a selfless approach where it's not just about my happiness. I mean, if you have young kids, it's really not about your own happiness. Like, you're there to support them through all the dirty diapers, through all the crying, through all the sacrifice that we make for our kids. The same thing goes with our marriage. We're making sacrifices for a goal. When we raise kids, we can see the goal in mind. We want to get them 18 out of the house and healthy, right? We want to get them to a place where they can be a successful adult. And often we lose the vision for our own marriage, where we're just going through life, and you don't want to get to the point where you're just doing life with a person to raise kids, and all of a sudden that person becomes a stranger by the time your kids are out of the house. Like, you have to build a life with a person apart from just the tasks that you do, going to work, raising kids, eating, sleeping, rinse and repeat. And so I think that's kind of where we should go next, is how do you have the term dating your spouse? How do you date your spouse? How do you keep things exciting, but also to the point, practically different seasons you might be in? How do you find that balance when sometimes life can be chaotic?
Yeah, definitely. Just like I said earlier, I'm a planner. And so if things don't get on the calendar or they don't get planned, they just don't get done. And just never going to just be spontaneous. I'm not a spontaneous person naturally. And so for us, we have to put it on our schedule. Okay, we're going to have a date night. We're going to, whether it's going out to eat or going to do something or being at home and watching a movie, because like we said, different seasons of life, there's different things to do. And we don't always have a babysitter with us for, our kids. And so, but that's not an excuse to not do anything. So just finding what works within your budget, within your schedule, but it still needs to be there, whether it's 30 minutes, an hour, or 2 hours, those kinds of things. Make the time, because if you don't make time for it, it just won't happen. Right.
Yeah, exactly. If you are a schedule follower, that's what we started doing. For us, we realized we should be praying more together. We should have family devotions. Those are things we kind of did hit or miss over the years. And so rather recently, we put that on the schedule. Like, we follow our schedule, so why don't we put things on there that we know that we're going to follow, like praying together, like having family devotions. And so really, that's not something like, oh, well, do the exact same thing we're doing, but figure out what works for you. Like, maybe you're in a season where you have more time with your spouse. You can go to coffee with them. You can have more date nights. You can spend time on mission with them. Maybe even going on a mission trip. Maybe even serving a local outreach. A soup kitchen or homeless shelter. Maybe you can actually do mission-minded things together. But if you're not at that phase, if you have young kids, like maybe you're just trying to survive, but not to the point where you're drained every day. So I think also having a personal relationship with Jesus separate from the marriage, individually getting filled up, so that when you come together as a couple, you're giving something in the marriage, and not just trying to take from your partner's being filled up. For prayer life, for example, if you're not praying together, if you're not praying individually, then prayer is non-existent. And I've said before, like, if we believe in the power of prayer, we would pray more often. And so as Christians especially, and as a Christian marriage, and we won't get into all the details of like, well, what if one partner is not Christian? Like, there's a lot of what ifs and problems in marriage, but we're just talking like, for us personally, how we go through the fact that we each have a prayer life, we each have quiet time in the morning, but also we want to model that to our kids. We want them to see that, not just what we say. The worst thing you can say as a parent is just do what I say, not what I do. And so when we modeled that for our kids, we want them to have a relationship with Jesus Christ that's their own and not built on their parents' faith, which then has more potential to collapse once they hit the world and are faced with all the challenges we know that adults can face once they hit the ground running with work and school and all those things that happen after they're out of the house. And so all that to say, like, we have to model to our kids, to those around us. And that's really a lot of our mission when we talk about being on mission for God, being on mission together. Our mission as Christians is to make disciples. And so as a marriage, we exist to make disciples as well with our kids and with those that we influence where God has gifted us. And I think with our giftings, it's important to know how God has designed you, how your personality is designed, how your giftings are designed, so that you can then serve. But what's the importance of understanding the differences between each person in the relationship so that you can then relate to them maybe in a different way than you would by just what you understand?
Yeah, it's definitely important to know, one, how your spouse views life and their personality and their temperament. It's also another thing to know your own self. And so I think it really does start with owning what your own temperament is, what you like, what you dislike. I struggled with this a lot early on in our marriage where I feel like I expected you, Tim, to know exactly what I was thinking, or I just, waited for you to talk to me, and I just kind of responded from that instead of realizing, here's the areas that I need to work on, here's the areas that I struggle in, or what I'm hoping to see that I need to communicate better, and not just depending on you to see those in me, to have to know those in myself. And then also after that, recognizing what was in you and your personality and how I could respond better, like by different scenarios, oh, he responded this way when I said this, or I didn't say anything and he never even noticed. So taking those times to recognize that, oh yeah, there's times that I have to speak up for myself. I have to let you know and communicate those well. And then whenever they're communicated, you respond very well to me. And so just being able to understand yourself and your spouse is really important, and especially with communication and conflict, how to handle that in your marriage as that comes up.
Yeah, and no two people in a marriage are the same. And so knowing that, when you look at like the 5 love languages, the 5 love languages really brought this to light, where people love differently. They receive love and show love differently. And understanding that helps you understand, hey, if you're not a gift giver, don't like getting gifts, if I give you gifts over and over and you're like, hey, you don't love me because you're not doing the dishes or you don't spend quality time with me, that's just an example of, and if you haven't studied that book, please do so, because it's very powerful. Also, taking a spiritual gifts test helps, because how has God wired you? What giftings has he placed in you? And that will help you understand your spouse in the ways they like to serve, in the ways that they are building God's kingdom apart from the marriage and within the marriage. If having family devotions is hard, but you are someone who likes to serve, maybe a part of your time serving is not just building up and reading the Word of God, which you should do anyway. Maybe you as a family will go out and do something like feed my starving children, and build boxes together, that kind of stuff. And I think for us, like, I'm high in discernment. That's something I enjoy, is being able to discern truth from not truth. And I talk about that a lot, and you're high in compassion. Yep. And we understand that about each other. It doesn't mean that I'm not compassionate, which, you'd probably beg to differ sometimes on that. It doesn't mean you don't have discernment. Right. But our strengths come to the forefront, and those are the things we often lead with. And so understanding that about your spouse will mean that you can then balance each other, right? You're not looking to make a clone of yourself. That's something we often do. I think in when the problems arise in marriage, we look at the other person. We're like, well, you don't like exactly what I like. You don't respond to this exactly like I do. And now there's a conflict. Instead of appreciating the differences and trying to find a good way to do life together despite them. Right. Yeah, definitely working together, this teamwork. And when you can kind of see where someone's coming from and then finding that balance, that complement, and it just works so much smoother, just being able to understand, especially as a parenting our children, because our children are different as well. And so parenting them differently, and where one parent can be the firmer one or can see certain
things that our children are struggling with, the other one can come alongside from another angle. And it creates such a more well-balanced approach.
Right. Do you want to tell the San Francisco story, or should I?
Well, maybe I'll tell it from my perspective, because it's mainly only been told from your perspective. So
Okay, go for it.
So I think it was 1 year into our marriage, we went to San Francisco for a vacation. And so it was just Tim and I. We didn't have any children yet. And we decided one day to go for a walk, to go to a scenic area. And we looked on the map, and it didn't link very far. So we just decided hey, we'll just walk there. It's better and easier than getting a cab or taking the trolley. And so we did. And little did we know that we were walking right through the middle of just complete poverty. Homelessness was everywhere. And
This was a long street. So it's like just really
blocks
long.
And blocks. Yeah.
And before we realized it, we're in the middle of this street, and there's just homeless on both sides of us all the way down this street. So go ahead.
And this was really my first exposure to seeing that. And so being the empath that I am, became really overwhelming to me. I just was really moved to compassion. Still am thinking about it to this day, because I just saw such hopelessness and despair, and just was really eye-opening to me. And so I was praying to myself, while we're walking, and asking the Lord just, first of all, for comfort and for these people, and maybe a little bit like comfort for, protection for ourselves, but just seeing what can I do to make a difference in these people's lives. And so right as we're getting towards the end, there's a woman who comes up to me, and she starts to tell me a story about needing money for the bus, and and she's talking about all kinds of things. And so I just felt like a boldness rise up within me, and I felt like, okay, here's my opportunity to make a difference. And so as she's asking for this money, and I told her, I just went back to my Sunday school days of Peter and John, and okay, I don't have any money for you, but here's what I do have. I have Jesus for you. And so I began to talk to her about Jesus, and she didn't really respond that well. And next thing I know, Tim is pulling me away, like, we have to go, urgency. He just was really upset. And you want to take it from there?
Well, yeah, I mean, from my perspective, like, we're in this vulnerable place, walking through in a place we don't belong. And the idea of stopping for any length of time to talk when, we could easily be surrounded by people who want our wallet and whatever, just made me like go into protector mode. Like, this situation, if you analyze it from a top level, it's not something we need to be in. We're not ready for it. We haven't, prayed. It's different if you're like witnessing on the street, prayerfully going into witnessing to the homeless. That's not where we were at. We were on vacation, not prepared for this. So my mind came up like, okay, we need to go. So I kept like almost pulling you, like, I know you're talking to this lady, but we need to go now. And so it's a funny story, but it just brings out the difference on, and like, we complement each other because we have a different perspective.
Yeah.
I like this quote from You and Me Forever. It says, being in war together is what keeps us from being at war with each other. And so oftentimes we see our spouse as an enemy, and that's exactly what our main enemy wants. Satan wants us to vilify those we love and those we're on call to be in mission together. Our same thing goes for our children. Like, our children are oftentimes their biggest enemy because they're just constantly arguing at each other. And the same thing goes to, many marriages. They just constant arguing. And what if we actually saw the bigger picture? What if we saw that, hey, we're trying to leave a legacy. We're trying to do what God has us to do. And we can't move forward if we're just stuck in this argumentative state where we are just trying to survive instead of thriving as God calls us to be. Now marriage is war. A lot of times it is a struggle. You have to go through, for better or worse, richer or poorer, all that's real when you say that in your vows. There is a very real, you can't just casually, like you don't walk into war in a battlefield. You just don't just walk into a battlefield saying, hey, I'm here, let's go, right? You have to be prayed up. You have to get in the word. You have to pray together. Like all these things that we're talking about is just important. And it's not like, all right, year 10, we're good. Now we can just relax, right? As long as you're together, you are in battle together. And so if you see it as together, then it's much harder to push the other person away, I think.
Exactly. And also, your spouse will never fill every area of your life. You cannot depend on them to fulfill that. And that was something God had to take me through, is that my husband will never fill all those voids where Jesus was meant to fill. And so we have to step back and we have to fill that void with Jesus and seek after him and find our identity in who he has called us to be as individuals. And then we are complete. And then we can bring that to the table for marriage and recognize and compliment one another and come alongside each other. So just an encouragement, especially too, if you are not married and you're looking for a spouse, that person will never fill all the things, all the desires that you think you have, all the needs that you think you have, all those ways that you're looking to fill, that can only be filled through your own personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And what's going to make it the most balanced is when each spouse is finding their identity in Christ first, and then coming alongside one another, and also recognizing and remembering, we all know this, but we're not perfect, and we cannot expect perfection from other people, from our spouse. And so they will let you down. Yeah. They will mess up and they will sin. I will hurt his feelings. I will do all these things. And when we have to have grace for one another. That doesn't mean that we get to be a doormat for someone, that we get to walk in abuse. That is not okay. So that is not what I'm saying, but it is being able to have grace for one another and recognizing that, Tim is God's son first, and then he's my husband, and I am God's daughter first, and then his wife. And so putting those things in the right order.
It's really good. Really good way to end. Well, thanks for joining us on Pastor Talk. Please subscribe. And we are sponsored today. We have two sponsors now. First is Behringer Tools, who's been with us from almost the very beginning, lifetime promise guaranteed. And now our new sponsor is Lady Boss Shoes, premium Christian footwear. Jamie, tell us what Lady Boss means to you.
Lady Boss gives me the confidence I need to do the job that I have and to be confident. That's what it does. Confidence.
Mm-hmm. Powerful confidence.
Yes.
At that. So, well, thanks for joining us again. We'll see you next time on Pastor Talk.